So I just wanted to record a video to follow up just on one final detail around our network analysis that we completed in class. We talked about what networks are, what the difference between networking behaviors and social networks are, and the idea of social capital. We looked at the Heidi Roizen case to think about different tactics, different values and principles that we might have around our approach to developing network connections and for what we might use our networks for, and when we would or wouldn't invoke a connection or a tie and ask something from our network. And I think Heidi represented some great things for us to think about in terms of formulating our own approaches to both building and using our networks. Then we did the simulation, and in the simulation we illustrated and learned about what the impact of network structure is and our position in the structure. And we were looking at the difference between being central, which means we have many connections coming in and out of ourselves in the network, and that distinction between being in a brokerage or bridging or structural hold position, which is where we are connecting different groups that are not otherwise connected. And leveraging the work of Ron Burt to talk about how those are extremely powerful and influential positions. So in the context of our lecture and material and focus on power, politics, and influence, understanding the overall network structure and identifying those favorable network positions is really important. It's also important, though, to remember that centrality can quickly become overloaded. As we saw in the simulation results, if you're a central person, you're oftentimes being contacted a great deal, and that can challenge you for completing your own work if people are regularly coming to you, maybe interrupting you, looking for your advice, looking for your help, looking for your expertise. So there's always a bit of a balance between the power that is available to being in one of those favorable network spots and also some of the additional workload and challenge that can come from that. And then finally, we talked about density as another feature of our network structure, thinking about the more the people we're connected to are interconnected with each other, the higher the density. And we talked about how, for generally speaking, for innovation, for creativity, for career advancement, we want to have lower density, which represents the fact that the people we're tied to are coming from unique different groups and pockets. And then finally, we talked a bit about the content of our network and the need to think about finding diverse ties at different levels, superior peers and subordinates, but also with people who are different from us in different business units and maybe different industries, so that we have access both when we're seeking things like jobs or employment, but also when we're thinking about strategic thinking and being creative, that we in fact have access to different thinking. We also want to combine weak and strong ties, because those sort of second tier, third tier weak ties that we might have access to are often the source of very powerful inputs and also ways to access new opportunities and see and find those opportunities. So we want to not discount weak ties. We want to recognize their value, but it's also very important in your strategy, kind of like Heidi, to be able to very clearly tell people in that broader weak tie network what you offer, so that people who don't know you personally or know you deeply with a strong tie still know what you have available, and that might lead to more opportunities emerging from those weak ties. And then finally, we talked about the fact that we need more than one network. We need to think about the operational network, and that is a case where our immediate team and coworkers, where density is a good thing. We want to have high interconnectedness in that local operational group, because it means there's consistency and trust and kind of efficient communication going on with high levels of interconnectedness. But for our personal network, our kind of personal board of directors, and for the strategic network, we definitely want to think about lower density, greater diversity, and a mix of more weak ties in those kinds of networks for the personal and strategic to be most effective. So coming off of all of that, the last thing I wanted to point out that we didn't have time for is that we always have to be thinking about refreshing our network. It's very easy to let this fall by the wayside and find that our network isn't serving us. And we also need to be thinking about, I would say, two career steps down the road, to be thinking about certainly what after the next promotion, what kind of network do you need, and building those connections now, because one of the big derailers is people get promoted and they really don't have the network in place to succeed in that new role. So we want to think ahead and plan ahead. But we also have to recognize that different roles, different positions, different career stages require different networks. And if we're not mindful of that, we're not likely to be as effective in those roles. So we need to think about what we need now and what we need in the future. So one thing to think a little bit about is this idea of maintaining your network, but then also thinking about transitions in your network. So you need to keep these sort of infrequent contacts active. So people who maybe you had ties with in a previous job, previous role, previous part of your life, they're there. They're still your connections. They're still your network ties. But if you've kind of left them and not touched base for a long time, it's worthwhile just sort of thinking about on a regular basis, putting as part of your career plan, putting as part of your calendar to reach out to people that you'd like to maintain some connection with. And there's a variety of ways to do that. You might, I think I mentioned that, if I know that I have a colleague in Germany, I noticed, actually this just happened, a colleague of mine, she has a pug dog breed and loves her pug. And I noticed an article in the New York Times about how Germans love pugs. And there's this whole underground society of pug racing, kind of like the dachshund racing, I think, at Canterbury Park. So I sent her a little note with that article. And, I haven't talked to her in person for a couple years now, but that was a way just to make a reconnection, kind of stay fresh. And keep some sense of connectedness and reciprocity. So, you can sort of cycle through those people you think you want to maintain and just, every now and then reach out and check in. I think that's always a really effective way to think about maintaining your ties. You need to think about these long and short-term goals I already mentioned. And then, the big thing that I can't emphasize enough is that you need those relationships before you need them. It's not very effective to go reach out to somebody when you're going to immediately ask for something. That seems instrumental. It seems disingenuous. And I think it's why the idea of networking behaviors often sort of have these negative connotations, is because we're not just building the relationship and having it in place before we need something from it. So I think that's along the lines of Heidi's lesson of meeting people and genuinely be interested in learning something about what they do, what interests them, just for the sake of that, and then understand that eventually, subsequently, there may be some benefit from having that relationship. But that brings us to Heidi again, and how the idea of transitioning or moving into different areas, or maybe even a full-on career change, which for some of you, that's exactly what you're doing in CEMBA, is you're thinking about moving from one sector, maybe military, to private sector, one industry, maybe med devices, to ag, I don't know, but whatever it might be, those are big transitions, and oftentimes the network built in one can help you for aspects of that new job, but not everything. So you do have to be thinking ahead to understanding what could be next. And I have a link here. I'm not sure if in the YouTube video it's going to work and be live, so I'll put it in my email to you. But it's a little bit further into the presentation I shared, the video about Heidi. This one is at 2 minutes, 25 seconds, but she talks there about how she has this new venture idea for an idea called Skinny Songs, where she's recording music for weight loss and exercise. And she talks very poignantly about how her network, despite being a titan of Silicon Valley, a powerhouse of venture capital, how the network she had built for that did not transfer for this new venture she was trying to get off the ground, and the recognition even she had, sort of the queen of networking, that it still didn't necessarily take care of a new thing she was trying to do. And so I'll put that link there. I recommend that you watch that little part of the clip. You can certainly listen to the whole video if you have time as well. But it points out this need, right? That if we're thinking about big transitions, even more so, it's important to plan ahead and try to build those connections to help us with those kinds of big career transitions. And then finally, I've already mentioned, keeping kind of context active, but there's some interesting new research that shows that even when you have left relationships dormant for a long time, there's still a valuable source of social capital for you. So let me just describe this briefly here. Basically, this research wanted to show, could you actually get value out of your connections that you haven't talked to for quite a long time? And I'm just going to pause for just a moment here.